The entire restaurant froze when the Korean CEO began speaking. It wasn't because of his tone, it was calm, almost musical, but because not a single person in the Grand Manhattan dining room understood what he'd just said. Waiters hesitated mid-step, silver trays trembling slightly in the low golden light. Executives in sleek suits exchanged awkward glances. The translator, seated near the head of the table, went pale, flipping through her notes as if a phrase might suddenly appear there to save her. Mr. Han Jae-sung's voice carried effortlessly across the table. He was not loud, but there was something in his cadence, controlled, deliberate, that commanded attention. The way he spoke Korean was almost old-fashioned, formal in a way that made younger interpreters nervous. His words were wrapped in layers of nuance that even fluent speakers would struggle to unpack. For a moment he paused, glancing at the translator, waiting. Nothing. A long silence followed. At the far end of the room, a young waitress clutched an empty pitcher of water, frozen in place. Her name was Lena Park, 26 years old, quiet to the point of invisibility. Her co-workers called her the Ghost because she never raised her voice, never made mistakes, never drew attention to herself. She'd been working at the Glass House, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, for almost 2 years now, and not one guest had ever learned her name. She preferred it that way. Tonight, though, anonymity felt like a curse. Because she understood every single word the CEO had just said. The words were heavy, filled with frustration and irony. He had just asked, almost mockingly, how a team of international investors could expect to build trust when no one even bothered to understand his language. He'd used an old Korean proverb to drive his point home: you can't draw a tiger if you've never seen one. The translator didn't even try to repeat it. She simply smiled awkwardly and said, Mr. Han says he is honored to be here. The executives clapped politely, oblivious to the insult buried in the CEO's tone. Lena's grip tightened on the pitcher until her knuckles turned white. Her heart pounded. She wanted to melt into the floor, pretend she hadn't heard, pretend it wasn't her business, but her conscience screamed louder than her fear. Across the table, Mr. Han's expression barely changed, but his eyes, sharp, analytical, slightly tired, swept the room. He saw confusion. He saw ignorance. He saw the hollow smiles of people who wanted his money, not his partnership. It wasn't the first time. In every country he'd visited, he'd encountered the same polite barrier, the illusion of communication masking a complete lack of understanding. He said something else then, softer, almost to himself: the world respects translation only when it suits them. Lena's stomach turned. The translator, still fumbling, muttered something about global collaboration. The executives nodded, smiling wider, pretending comprehension. It was unbearable. Her pulse thudded in her ears. And before she could stop herself, the words escaped her lips. Clear, calm, perfectly pronounced Korean. Excuse me, sir. I believe your words were mistranslated. The entire room went silent. Even the music seemed to stop. A dozen eyes turned toward her, disbelieving. Lena's body went cold. She wanted to rewind time, to undo it, but it was too late. Mr. Han's head tilted slightly, his gaze finding her across the room. The expression in his eyes was unreadable. Surprise, curiosity, maybe something deeper. The translator looked mortified. She's just a waitress, she stammered, trying to laugh it off. Perhaps she misunderstood. But Lena didn't look away. Her voice didn't shake. No, I didn't misunderstand. Her words came slow, measured, each syllable deliberate. He said, you cannot draw a tiger if you've never seen one. It means you cannot pretend to understand something, or someone, if you've never taken the time to learn. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. A few of them chuckled nervously, like it was all some cultural misunderstanding. But Mr. Han's face broke into the faintest hint of a smile. A real one. Not polite. Not corporate. Genuine amusement flickered in his eyes. And yet, he said, switching to English so smoothly it startled everyone, it seems the only person who understood me tonight was not hired to do so. A murmur rippled across the room. The translator's cheeks flushed crimson. One of the American investors cleared his throat loudly, trying to redirect the conversation. Well, these things happen with languages, don't they? No harm done. But Mr. Han didn't move on. His gaze lingered on Lena. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated. Lena. Lena Park. Lena Park, he repeated as though tasting the syllables. Korean name? She nodded once. Half, she said quietly. My father was from Busan. Something softened in his face, almost imperceptibly. I see. Then, turning to the table, perhaps we'll continue this meeting tomorrow. Tonight it seems I've learned something far more important. And with that he stood, buttoned his charcoal gray suit and bowed, slightly but deliberately, toward Lena before leaving the room. The others sat in stunned silence. The translator gathered her notes with trembling hands. Lena's manager, a stocky man named Robert, hurried over, whispering urgently, What the hell was that, Lena? You can't just interrupt a client. I'm sorry, she said quickly, voice trembling now that the moment had passed. He was being misunderstood. I don't care. That was the CEO of Han Industrial Group. His voice lowered, harsh. If he complains, you're done here. You understand me? She nodded, mortified, throat tight. The rush of adrenaline drained out of her body, leaving only exhaustion and dread. She ducked into the kitchen, ignoring the curious stares of other servers. Behind the safety of the stainless steel doors, the noise returned. Orders shouted, pans clattering, the hiss of steam. But Lena barely heard it. She stood near the sink, staring at her reflection in the metal. Her reflection looked foreign, eyes wide, hair clinging to her forehead, chest rising and falling too fast. What had she done? She shouldn't have spoken. She'd spent years perfecting the art of invisibility. Ever since that day 3 years ago when she'd lost everything. The internship, the references, the dream job that had turned into a nightmare the moment she'd exposed her supervisor's fraud. They'd buried her. Blacklisted her quietly. No one hired whistleblowers, not in New York. So she'd stopped fighting. She'd taken the first job that didn't ask too many questions, a waitress position at the glass house. It was supposed to be temporary. It had become her hiding place. And now, in one reckless moment, she'd spoken Korean in front of the most powerful man she'd ever served. By the time her shift ended, it was past midnight. The city outside was cold, glittering, half asleep. Lena changed out of her uniform, wrapping her coat tighter as she stepped into the night. The air smelled faintly of rain and car exhaust. Her bus stop was 5 blocks away. She walked fast, trying not to think, but the moment replayed itself endlessly in her mind. Mr. Han's eyes, sharp and unreadable. His faint smile, the way he'd said her name. Her phone buzzed. A message from her roommate, rent due tomorrow. Please don't be late this time. Lena sighed, typing back a quick apology she couldn't afford to mean. Her paycheck would barely cover her share. The tips had been terrible lately, and she'd lost one shift after catching a cold last week. Now she might lose this job entirely. She reached the bus stop, sat down and tried to breathe. A city bus roared past, lights flashing across her face. The street was almost empty, just her, a street musician packing up, and a man standing across the intersection. He was tall, wearing a long dark coat, his posture too straight for a local. When the streetlight changed, he crossed toward her. Her heart skipped. No, she told herself. Coincidence. But when he came closer, the truth hit her. It was him. Mr. Han stopped a few feet away. The cold wind lifted the edge of his coat. You live near here? He asked, his tone casual, almost gentle. Lena blinked, caught off guard. Ah yes. Queens. He nodded thoughtfully. I was on my way to the plaza, but I wanted to speak with you. Her pulse raced. If this is about earlier, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have interrupted. On the contrary. His mouth curved slightly. You may have saved my company from embarrassment. That translator was recommended by a firm I suspect is compromised. She frowned. Compromised? Leaking information, he said simply. We're negotiating with several Western partners. Someone's been feeding details to our competitors. When I realized she was fumbling, I decided to test her. You were the only one who passed. Lena didn't know what to say. The bus approached, brakes screeching. She turned toward it automatically, but he spoke again, quietly. I may need your help. Her hand froze on the bus door. My help? I need someone fluent in both languages, but outside corporate politics. Someone who understands nuance and integrity. She hesitated. I'm just a waitress. Mr. Han's eyes softened. No, he said. You're someone who speaks the truth even when it costs you. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small card embossed with gold Korean characters and an English signature beneath. Han Jae-sung, CEO Han Industrial Group. Call this number tomorrow at noon. My assistant will arrange everything. Lena stared at the card, unsure whether to take it. It gleamed under the streetlight, elegant and intimidating. Why me? She whispered. He met her eyes. Because the people who understand both worlds are the ones who can bridge them. Then, before she could respond, he stepped back as the next cab arrived, nodded politely and disappeared into the night. The bus pulled away without her. Lena stood on the empty sidewalk, the card heavy in her hand. The wind bit at her cheeks, but she barely felt it. Her mind was a storm, fear, disbelief, a flicker of something dangerous she hadn't felt in years, hope. She slipped the card into her pocket and whispered to herself, Don't be stupid, Lena. She'd promised herself never to get involved again. Not after what happened at Kimtech. Not after they dragged her name through the mud for trying to do the right thing. But as she walked home, the memory of Mr. Han's voice lingered. You cannot draw a tiger if you've never seen one. Maybe he wasn't just talking about business. Maybe he'd meant people like her, unseen, underestimated, yet watching everything. That night, as she lay in her tiny apartment staring at the cracked ceiling, sleep wouldn't come. The city hummed outside. Her roommate snored softly in the next room. The business card rested on her nightstand, glowing faintly in the light from the window. Lena turned it over again and again between her fingers. The embossed characters caught the light like small flames. She should throw it away. She knew that. Nothing good ever came from powerful men offering opportunity. But still, something inside her whispered, what if this time is different? The last thing she saw before closing her eyes was the name printed in gold, and the faint reflection of her own face beside it. Two worlds colliding in silence, waiting for the morning to decide which one would win. The morning light filtered through the cracked blinds of Lena's apartment, slicing across the room in thin bands of gold. Her phone alarm buzzed insistently beside the bed, but she didn't move. For the first time in years, she'd barely slept, and when she finally opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was the business card resting on the nightstand. It glowed faintly in the morning sun, elegant and severe, like a door to another world. Han Jae-sung, Geo. Han Industrial Group. The name alone carried weight. Even people outside the business world knew it. The man was practically a legend in corporate circles. Self-made, they said. Ruthless, brilliant, unpredictable. The kind of man who could buy a company before breakfast and bankrupt his enemies by lunch. The kind of man Lena had spent her whole life trying to avoid. And yet, he had asked for her help. She groaned softly and rolled onto her side, burying her face in the pillow. No, she whispered to herself. Forget it. You need this job. Don't mess it up. From the next room, her roommate's voice broke through the thin wall. Lena, you up? Rent's due today. Lena forced herself out of bed. Yeah, I know. Her voice came out rough, cracked with exhaustion. You better. Landlord said he's raising it next month if we're late again. Great. She dressed quickly, tying her hair back into its usual neat ponytail. The restaurant uniform hung beside the door like armor. Crisp white shirt, black apron, polished shoes. She put it on automatically, every movement practiced, efficient. But as she slipped her phone into her pocket, her fingers brushed against the edge of that gold-embossed card. For a moment she hesitated. No. That's what he'd said. His assistant will arrange everything. She told herself she wouldn't call. She repeated it 3 times while walking to the bus stop, twice more as she boarded, and once again when she stepped into the restaurant's back entrance. But the thought wouldn't leave her. All morning she moved like a ghost through her shift. Her manager barely spoke to her except to glare now and then. The other waitresses whispered behind her back, half in awe, half in irritation. Did you hear what she did? One of them said in the break room. Corrected a CEO in the middle of dinner. In Korean. She's lucky she wasn't fired, another replied. If that were me, I'd have been escorted out by security. Lena said nothing. She kept her eyes on her tray, head down, focusing on refilling coffee and clearing tables. But every few minutes, her gaze drifted toward the clock. 11:55. She slipped into the staff restroom, locking the door behind her. The fluorescent light flickered overhead as she pulled the card from her apron pocket. Her heart thudded so loud it almost drowned out the hum of the pipes. No, she told her reflection. You promised yourself. No more powerful people. No more risks. But she'd already unlocked her phone. Her thumb hovered over the keypad. Finally she dialed. It rang twice before a woman answered, calm, polished, professional. Han Group Executive Office, this is Ms. Yu. Lena's throat went dry. Hi, my name is Lena Park. Mr. Han told me to call at noon. There was a pause. The faint clicking of a keyboard. Then the woman's tone shifted subtly, less perfunctory, more respectful. Ah yes, Mississippi Park. Mr. Han informed me to expect your call. He's currently in meetings, but he's arranged a private appointment for you this afternoon. Would 3 o'clock work? Lena's heart jumped. I have a shift. Mr. Han said he would speak with your employer if necessary. Lena nearly dropped the phone. No, please don't do that. I'll make it work. Excellent. The driver will pick you up at 2:30 sharp. Please text this number your address. Wait, Lena said quickly. What is this meeting about? Ms. Yu hesitated just long enough to make her nervous. Mr. Han said only this, tell her it's an opportunity to use her voice again. The line went dead. Lena stared at the phone. The hum of the fluorescent light filled the silence. By 2:30, a black Genesis sedan pulled up to the curb outside her apartment. It looked entirely out of place on the cracked asphalt street lined with laundromats and corner stores. The driver, a neatly dressed man in a dark suit, stepped out and opened the back door without a word. Lena hesitated only a moment before sliding in. The leather seats were soft, the air faintly scented with cedar. As the city blurred past, she stared out the window, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her mind raced. Why her? What could he possibly want? She wasn't a translator. Not anymore. Not after Kimtech. But the thought of that old life, boardrooms, glass walls, fluorescent smiles, made her stomach knot. She'd been 23, fresh out of college, eager to prove herself. She joined Kimtech as a junior interpreter, working under a senior director named Choi Min-jun. He'd seemed kind at first. Polite. Encouraging. Until she'd noticed the numbers that didn't add up in his reports. The hush payments. The missing invoices. When she'd asked questions he'd called her naive. When she refused to ignore it, he'd framed her for leaking internal documents. By the time she'd realized what he'd done, it was too late. She'd been fired, blacklisted, humiliated. The car slowed, pulling into the circular driveway of a glass tower on Park Avenue. Lena's breath caught. Han Industrial's U.S. headquarters. She'd walked past it before, countless times, never daring to imagine stepping inside. The driver opened her door. "This way, Mississippi Park." The lobby was vast, minimalist, and utterly silent except for the soft click of her shoes on marble. A receptionist behind a sleek white desk greeted her with a bow. "Mississippi Park, welcome. Mr. Han is expecting you." She followed the woman to a private elevator. Her reflection stared back at her in the mirrored walls, neat ponytail, simple blouse, nervous eyes. The doors slid open on the top floor. Mr. Han's office looked out over the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline like a painting. He stood near them, hands clasped behind his back, gazing at the clouds. "Mississippi Park," he said without turning. "You came." Lena bowed slightly. "Yes, sir. Though I'm still not sure why." He turned then and she caught her first clear view of him in daylight. He was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s maybe, but carried himself with the quiet authority of someone twice that age. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and unsettlingly calm. "Please," he said, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. "Sit." She obeyed, perching on the edge of the leather seat like a student awaiting judgment. He studied her for a moment before speaking. "You impressed me last night. Few people would have spoken up in that situation. Fewer still would have done it with respect." "I didn't mean to embarrass anyone," she said quickly. "I just couldn't let your words be twisted." He smiled faintly. "Integrity is rare in this city." A long pause stretched between them. Lena tried to steady her hands. Finally he said, "I'm negotiating a merger with Kimtech Global." The name hit her like a slap. Her throat went dry. "Kimtech?" He nodded. "You've heard of them." She laughed bitterly. "You could say that." "I thought so," he said quietly. "My team discovered your name while reviewing internal reports. You were dismissed 3 years ago under questionable circumstances." Her stomach twisted. "So you did investigate me?" "Of course." His tone was factual, not apologetic. "I don't offer opportunities without understanding who I'm speaking to." "You were framed, weren't you?" Lena froze. "How could you possibly?" "I've seen the pattern before," he said, stepping closer. "Mr. Choi's name appears in several fraud audits I reviewed last month. He's currently the lead negotiator on the other side of my merger." The air seemed to vanish from the room. Lena could barely breathe. "He's still there?" "For now," Mr. Han said. "Which is why I need someone I can trust to attend the upcoming meeting as my independent translator. I want someone who understands his language, both the words and the intentions behind them." Lena shook her head. "I can't. If he sees me—" "He won't," Mr. Han interrupted. "You'll be listed as an external consultant. No public record. Just one meeting." She stood abruptly. "This isn't a good idea. That man destroyed my career. He called me a traitor to my own people." Mr. Han's gaze softened slightly. "And yet here you are, still speaking the truth." Her breath caught. She turned away, staring out the window. The city glittered below, indifferent and vast. "You don't understand," she whispered. "He made sure no one would ever believe me again." "I believe you," Mr. Han said simply. The words hung in the air like a promise. No one had said that to her in 3 years. He stepped around the desk and handed her a slim folder. "These are the meeting details. Review them tonight. If you choose to help me, my driver will pick you up tomorrow morning at 8. She didn't take it. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. He considered her for a moment. "Because people like Choi thrive when good people stay silent. And because," he added after a beat, "I trust my instincts, and they tell me you're not the kind of person who runs from truth." Her heart thudded painfully. "You don't know me." "Not yet," he said, a small smile touching his lips. "But I intend to." By the time Lena stepped out of the building, the sky had darkened. The city lights flickered on, one by one, until the skyline glowed like a galaxy. She clutched the folder tightly against her chest. Inside were documents, names, meeting times, proof that he'd meant every word. She should walk away. She knew that. But as she rode the subway home, her reflection in the window looked different. Less like the ghost waitress she'd become, more like the woman she used to be. When she reached her stop, she lingered on the platform, staring at the faint imprint of her face in the glass. "Don't be naive," she told herself. "He's a CEO. They always have an agenda." But a small, treacherous part of her whispered back, "Maybe his agenda isn't the problem. Maybe this is your chance to fight back." That night she opened the folder. Inside was a single line, handwritten beneath the meeting schedule. "You cannot draw a tiger if you've never seen one. Let's make them see." Morning came with the kind of cold brightness that made the city look sharper, more awake than usual. Lena stood outside her apartment building, folder clutched against her chest, heart hammering in rhythm with the city traffic. The black Genesis sedan was already there, parked neatly by the curb. The same driver stepped out, bowed slightly and opened the back door. She hesitated only a second before sliding in. This time the ride felt heavier. The air hummed with unspoken anticipation. As the car wove through the Manhattan avenues, she glanced at her reflection in the tinted window. Her hair was perfectly tied back, her blouse pressed, her nerves barely contained beneath a veneer of calm. She looked like she belonged in the corporate world again, or at least she could almost believe she did. By the time they reached Han Industrial's U.S. headquarters, the city had settled into its morning rhythm. Streams of suited professionals poured into buildings, coffee cups in hand, faces blank with routine. Lena followed the driver through the marble lobby, up the private elevator, and into the same top-floor corridor. Only this time she wasn't a guest, she was part of something bigger, even if she didn't yet understand it. Mr. Han was waiting by the conference room. He wasn't alone this time. 2 assistants flanked him, one holding a tablet, the other a sleek briefcase. The moment she entered, his gaze found her immediately. "Mississippi Park," he said. "You're early." "I didn't want to be late," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. He nodded approvingly. "Good. Punctuality says more about character than words ever can." He gestured toward the conference table, where a stack of folders sat neatly aligned beside 2 bottles of still water. "Today's meeting is informal. We'll review documents, confirm translation protocols, and prepare for the negotiation with Kimtech tomorrow." The mention of that name sent a chill through her. She forced herself to nod. "Understood." Han studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "I don't want you to think of this as a test, Mississippi Park. You're not here to prove yourself to anyone. You're here because I need someone who can tell me the truth, not what I want to hear." She met his gaze. "Then I'll do my best to tell you everything as it is." "Good," he said simply. "Then let's begin." The next few hours passed in a blur of papers, contracts, and whispered corporate jargon. Han's assistants handed her drafts of the merger agreement, financial disclosures, and language comparison sheets. Her task was simple on paper: ensure that every Korean phrase carried the same legal weight in English. But as she read through the pages, a familiar unease crept over her. There were phrases, subtle, almost invisible, that carried dangerous ambiguity. One clause in particular caught her eye: conditional transfer of intellectual property rights pending mutual satisfaction of secondary audit criteria. It sounded harmless, but the Korean phrasing implied something entirely different: that ownership could shift immediately upon signing, giving Kimtech leverage long before Han's company saw any benefit. "Mr. Han," she said quietly, circling the line. "This phrase doesn't translate cleanly. It sounds cooperative in English but gives away primary control in Korean." He leaned over, reading her notes carefully. His expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened slightly. "Deliberate?" "Almost certainly." He nodded slowly. "I suspected as much." She blinked. "You did?" He smiled faintly. "Let's say I like to confirm my suspicions with proof. You just gave me that." Lena frowned, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to being believed this easily. "There are more sections like that," she said cautiously. "If you'd like, I can flag them all." "Do that," he said. "We'll need every one of them tomorrow." By the time the meeting ended, the skyline outside had shifted into afternoon light. Han dismissed his assistants, then turned back to her. "You've done well," he said. "Better than anyone on my team could have." She shook her head. "I just read carefully." He smiled. "That's more than most people in this business do." She hesitated, then asked, "Why didn't you tell me about the clause before?" "You said you suspected it. I wanted to see if you would catch it." Lena frowned slightly. "You were testing me?" He inclined his head. "In a way. But not for your skill, for your honesty. People who see mistakes often stay silent to protect their position. You didn't." Something about the way he said it, quiet, deliberate, made her chest tighten. She looked away, pretending to organize her notes. "You don't know what it cost me to speak up before," she murmured. He didn't respond for a long moment. Then softly, "I can imagine." When she finally looked up, his expression had softened. "You shouldn't be punished for doing the right thing, Mississippi Park. Not in my company." Her throat felt tight. "This isn't your company yet," she said with a small, nervous smile. "Not yet," he agreed. "But it will be, if tomorrow goes as planned." The following day, the air inside the Kimtech headquarters felt heavy with power. Lena had been here once before, years ago, when she was still an intern. The polished marble, the mirrored walls, the endless hum of ambition, none of it had changed. Only she had. Mr. Han walked beside her, exuding quiet authority. The receptionist bowed deeply, and an assistant ushered them into the main conference room. The walls were lined with glass, overlooking the city. At the far end sat a familiar figure, Choi Min-jun. Her breath caught. He hadn't changed much. The same immaculate suit, the same smooth smile that never reached his eyes. He stood when they entered, extending a hand toward Han. "Mr. Han," he said in Korean, "an honor to finally meet in person." Han shook his hand with practiced politeness. "Likewise, Mr. Choi." Then Choi's gaze shifted, and landed on her. For a moment, confusion flickered in his expression. Then recognition dawned, sharp as a blade. His smile faltered. "Mississippi Park?" Lena's heart thudded painfully. "Mr. Choi." He recovered quickly, slipping his mask back into place. "I didn't realize Kim Taeka's former employees were consulting for Han Industrial now." "She isn't," Han said smoothly. "Mississippi Park is an independent interpreter. I requested her personally." Choi's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing more. He gestured toward the table. "Shall we begin?" For the first hour, the meeting was civil. Polite smiles. Careful phrasing. Lena translated every sentence with precision, her voice steady even as her hands trembled beneath the table. Han spoke with calm authority, matching Choi's charm note for note. But she could feel the tension building, an undercurrent of manipulation threading through Choi's every word. He was doing it again, twisting language like wire. Using idioms that sounded harmless but carried hidden implications. Shifting the meaning just enough to trap the other party in agreement. Lena caught each one, translating them truthfully, exposing the tricks for what they were. After the third time, Choi's patience began to crack. "Mississippi Park," he said smoothly, switching to English, "perhaps you should let the official translator handle this." Han glanced at him. "I prefer her interpretation," he said mildly. "It's remarkably accurate." A muscle twitched in Choi's jaw. "Of course." They continued. The conversation deepened, veering into sensitive territory, intellectual property, audit procedures, trade secrets. Every word mattered. And then it happened again. Choi used a deliberately vague term, collaborative review, which in Korean legal context implied shared access to proprietary data. Lena's pulse spiked. "Mr. Han," she said quietly, switching languages mid-sentence. "He's implying full disclosure of your internal analytics." Han's gaze sharpened. "Is that so?" Choi's smile turned cold. "That's not what I said." "It's what you meant," Lena replied evenly. For a second, the room went silent. Then Han leaned back, studying Choi like a chess player who just cornered his opponent. "You seem to enjoy playing with words, Mr. Choi," he said in Korean. "But games like that have consequences." Choi's smile didn't waver. "Only for those who can't keep up." Han turned to Lena. "Translate that exactly, please." Her voice was calm, but her heart was racing. She did. The American executives on Han's side exchanged uneasy glances. The tone was unmistakable, arrogance wrapped in silk. Han's next words came softly but with weight. "I think that will be all for today." He stood. Lena followed, gathering her notes quickly. Choi's expression flickered with uncertainty. He hadn't expected such an abrupt end. "Mr. Han," he said smoothly, "perhaps we should." "We will continue tomorrow," Han interrupted. "But next time I suggest you bring your legal team. You'll need them." He walked out without another word. Lena followed, pulse pounding. In the elevator, silence stretched between them. The city lights blurred through the glass walls. Finally Han spoke. "You were right about him." She exhaled shakily. "He hasn't changed." Han looked at her then, really looked at her. "You handled yourself well. Most people would have folded under that pressure." "I've been through worse," she said quietly. He nodded. "I don't doubt that." As the elevator descended, he added softly, "Tomorrow we expose him. But we'll do it properly." She turned to him. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Han said, his voice low, "I don't intend to just win a contract. I intend to reveal exactly what kind of man he is." Lena stared at him, torn between fear and something dangerously close to admiration. For years she dreamed of justice. Now it felt closer than ever, and more terrifying than she'd imagined. When the elevator doors opened, he stepped aside, letting her exit first. "Get some rest, Mississippi Park. Tomorrow everything changes." She nodded slowly, clutching her folder like a lifeline. "Yes, sir." But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that nothing, not even the truth, came without a cost. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, the kind of day when the clouds hung low enough to press against the skyline. The rain came down in thin, icy sheets, streaking across the glass of the high-rise as Lena sat inside Han Industrial's boardroom once more. The world beyond the windows was a blur of wet concrete and headlights, but her focus was locked on the documents in front of her. Mr. Han stood near the window, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in sharp, measured Korean. His reflection in the glass looked like a man carved from stone, composed, untouchable, every word deliberate. Lena couldn't hear what he was saying, but his tone told her enough. Someone had rattled him. When he ended the call, he turned toward her. "Our meeting with Kim Tech is rescheduled for tomorrow morning. Their board wants to clarify yesterday's misunderstandings." His mouth tightened. "Which means they're regrouping." Lena nodded slowly. They'll try to reframe everything. Exactly. And I intend to be ready. He moved to the table, laying down a fresh stack of papers. These, he said, are internal memos leaked to my office late last night. Anonymous source. They reference a shell company, Hansio Analytics. Ever heard of it? The name hit her like a spark. Yes, she said quietly. That's one of Kimtech's subsidiaries. Or at least it used to be. They used it to move consulting fees off the books. Han's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. I suspected as much. And the man listed as primary advisor. He slid the page across the table. Lena's breath caught. Choi Min-jun. Han leaned forward, his voice low. He's been siphoning company assets for years, hidden under international transfers disguised as translation and research fees. If I can confirm that this merger collapses, and Kimtech's board collapses with it. She stared at the papers. Every word, every number was a ghost from her past. The same pattern she'd noticed 3 years ago. The same trail she tried to expose before they turned it against her. This is what you saw, he said, reading her silence. Isn't it? She nodded slowly. Yes. But I didn't have access to proof. Every document I found disappeared the next day. They made me sign a non-disclosure agreement and escorted me out like a criminal. Han studied her for a long moment. Then this is your chance to finish what they buried. Her throat felt tight. You don't understand. I tried to fight them once. I lost everything. I can't go through that again. Han's voice softened. You won't be alone this time. Something in his tone, quiet, unshakable, made her believe him. Against her better judgment, a spark of resolve flared in her chest. He handed her a secure tablet. I need you to review the attached contracts. Find every inconsistency between the English and Korean versions, especially anything related to Hansio Analytics. We'll confront them tomorrow, but we have to make sure we're right. Lena opened the file. Lines of text scrolled across the screen, numbers, legal terms, digital signatures. It was all too familiar. She worked in silence for hours, the storm outside echoing the storm building inside her. Han stayed nearby, pacing occasionally, fielding calls, but mostly watching her with quiet respect. The air between them felt charged, professional, yes, but something else too. Recognition. Understanding. The rare feeling of two people who had both fought invisible battles and survived. When she finally looked up, the city had turned to twilight. I found them, she said softly. Han stopped mid-step. Show me. She turned the tablet toward him. Here. Section 14b in Korean includes a reference to prior consulting engagements authorized by primary liaison. It's not in the English version. That phrase gives Choi the legal right to invoice Hansio Analytics retroactively. Once the deal's signed, he can drain millions before anyone notices. Han's eyes flicked over the screen, then met hers. You're certain? Positive. He exhaled slowly. That's the smoking gun. But before she could say anything, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's from Kimtech's legal office. He answered, switching to Korean. Han speaking. The voice on the other end was muffled, but Lena caught fragments, apologies, denials, vague threats. Han's tone turned glacial. If your company wants transparency, then you'll have it. Every line, every document. We meet tomorrow as planned. He hung up and turned to her. They know we're close. Lena felt a chill. What if they try to cover it up? They will, Han said simply. But it's too late for that. That night, Han's office stayed lit long after the rest of the building went dark. Lena sat across from him, sipping lukewarm coffee, surrounded by open files and glowing screens. Outside, the rain had turned to fog. It pressed against the windows like a living thing. Mississippi Park, Han said finally, setting down his pen. Tell me something. Why didn't you leave New York after what happened? She looked up, startled. I couldn't. My mother's buried here. My father's family, they wanted nothing to do with me after the scandal. I didn't have anywhere else to go. He nodded slowly. And yet you stayed. That says something. She gave a small, bitter laugh. It says I didn't have a choice. Maybe. Or maybe it says you don't give up as easily as you think. The words hung between them. For a moment, the silence was warm, almost fragile. Then Han stood, stretching slightly. Go home, Mississippi Park. Get some rest. Tomorrow we finish this. She hesitated, then nodded. Good night, Mr. Han. Good night. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. Lena. She froze. It was the first time he'd said her name without formality. He smiled faintly. You did well today. Her pulse jumped. Thank you. When she finally stepped into the empty elevator, her heart was racing for reasons she didn't want to admit. The next morning, she woke to find an envelope slipped under her apartment door. No name, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a printed message, stay out of this or you'll regret it. Beneath it, a photo, grainy black and white, of her standing beside Han outside the Kimtech building. Her stomach dropped. Someone was watching them. She grabbed her phone, hands trembling, and dialed Han's number. He answered immediately. Mississippi Park? I got a threat, she said breathlessly. Someone knows I'm helping you. Describe it. She did. He listened in silence, then said, It's meant to scare you. Don't let it. They're desperate. What if they're serious? Then they've already made their mistake. There was steel in his tone that sent a strange comfort through her. I'll send someone to check on you, he added. Stay home until I arrive. No, she said quickly. I'm coming to the office. I'm not hiding. A pause, then a faint smile in his voice. Very well. But you'll take my driver. By the time she arrived, Han was already waiting in the lobby. He looked different today, no tie, sleeves rolled up, tension simmering just beneath his calm exterior. We traced the message, he said as they walked toward the elevators. It was sent from a Kimtech server. Lena's breath caught. So it's them. Yes. Which means they're nervous. As the elevator doors closed, he added, This changes nothing. We proceed as planned. The conference room upstairs was prepared like a battlefield. Documents neatly stacked, laptops open, translators ready. When the Kimtech delegation arrived, Choi was at the front, flanked by lawyers. His smile was thin. I trust we can begin without theatrics today. Han gestured for Lena to sit beside him. By all means. The meeting began, each side circling the other with rehearsed politeness. For an hour nothing happened. But then Han spoke. Mr. Choi, before we finalize, I'd like to address one small matter. Hansio Analytics. Choi stiffened. I'm not sure I understand. I think you do, Han said calmly. Your company's accounting shows a series of payments routed through Hansio, consulting fees that never reached their supposed recipients. That's an internal issue, Choi said quickly. Irrelevant to this merger. Han smiled. On the contrary. It's central to the question of trust. He turned to Lena. Would you translate that for the record, Mississippi Park? Her voice didn't waver. He said, It's central to the question of trust. Choi's jaw tightened. You're overstepping, Mr. Han. Han's tone remained mild. Am I? Because my team found documents, signed by you, authorizing illegal transfers. Care to explain? For the first time, Choi's mask cracked. He looked directly at Lena. You, he hissed. You did this. She met his glare evenly. All I did was translate the truth. The room went silent. Then Han leaned forward, sliding a file across the table. Here's the evidence, Mr. Choi. Your signatures. Your offshore accounts. Your shell company. I believe your board will be very interested in these. Choi's face drained of color. One of the lawyers whispered urgently in his ear. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Han stood, buttoning his jacket. I think we're done here. As he and Lena walked out, she felt her knees go weak. It was over, or at least this part was. But beneath the relief, she felt something else rising. Fear. Because men like Choi didn't fall quietly. Han must have sensed it. In the elevator, he said softly, He'll try to retaliate. But he's finished. You did what no one else could. She shook her head. You did. I just helped. He looked at her then, the faintest warmth in his eyes. No, Mississippi Park. You reminded me why truth matters. Outside, the storm had broken. Rain washed over the city like cleansing fire. But deep inside, both of them knew, the fight was far from over. The city woke under a gray morning, but Lena barely noticed. She sat in Han's office with her hands wrapped around a mug of untouched coffee, staring at the documents scattered across the table. The confrontation at Kimtech had ended less than 12 hours ago, yet the echoes of it still pulsed through her chest. Every word, every look from Choi replayed in her mind like a haunting refrain. Han entered quietly, a phone in one hand and a frown shadowing his expression. He ended the call, set the device down and looked at her. The board called an emergency meeting, he said. Kimtech's directors are investigating Choi's transactions. It's only a matter of time before they confirm everything. Lena nodded, though she could sense the heaviness in his voice. That should be good news. It should, he admitted. But something doesn't sit right. Choi's influence runs deep. Men like him rarely go down alone. She leaned forward. You think he'll try to drag you into it? Han's lips pressed into a thin line. I think he'll try to destroy the evidence before it reaches their auditors. And if he can't, he'll come after whoever helped expose him. Her stomach twisted. You mean me? Han's gaze softened. He's already threatened you once. He'll try again. She forced a breath. Let him try. I'm done being afraid of that man. For the first time, Han smiled, not the calculated expression he wore in boardrooms, but something genuine, small, and almost protective. Good, he said quietly. Because fear is exactly what he counts on. They worked through the morning, preparing legal documents, compiling proof, sending encrypted files to Han's overseas counsel. The office buzzed with urgency. Yet beneath it all, there was an undercurrent of something more fragile between them, mutual respect, unspoken trust. a sense that their fates were now woven together by choice rather than circumstance. By noon a knock sounded at the door. Han's assistant entered, pale and nervous. "Sir, there's something you need to see." She handed him a tablet. Han scrolled, his expression darkening with every line. "What is this?" "An online post," the assistant whispered. "Anonymous source. It's going viral." Lena frowned. "What's happening?" Han handed her the tablet. Her breath caught as she read the headline, "Han Industrial CEO caught bribing whistleblower in corporate espionage scheme." Beneath it, photos, grainy, zoomed in, of her and Han outside the Kimtech building. Another showed them in the restaurant the night they met. The article twisted every fact, painting her as a disgraced ex-employee manipulating Han for revenge. Her throat closed. This is all lies." Han's jaw clenched. "Of course it is. But perception spreads faster than truth." The assistant spoke softly. "The story's been shared by several media outlets already. Kimtech's PR team is behind it. They're calling for an inquiry into Han Industrial's ethics." Han looked at Lena. "They're trying to discredit us before the board meeting." Her pulse quickened. "Can they?" "They can try," he said grimly. "But they won't win." She set the tablet down, her hands trembling. "They're using the same tactics they used on me. Twist the story, plant fake evidence, make me look unstable." Han's gaze was steady. "And we'll counter it, publicly and legally. I've already contacted my legal team." "But what about the board? Won't they believe what they see first?" He hesitated. "Some might. That's why we need to act fast." By evening the office was a storm of calls, emails, and damage control. Lena stayed by Han's side, reviewing every accusation line by line, tracing the origins of the leak. Her fingers moved fast, but her mind raced faster. The fear she thought she'd conquered came creeping back. Every notification felt like a bullet. Every headline was a reminder that her name was once again being dragged through the mud. At one point she stood abruptly. "I need air." Han glanced up from his laptop. "Stay inside the building. I'll have security." "No," she said, shaking her head. "I just need a minute." He hesitated, then nodded. "Don't go far." She stepped into the corridor, her footsteps echoing against the polished floor. The city glimmered through the glass walls, but all she saw were ghosts of her past. The reporters outside her old apartment, the whispers, the pity in her co-workers' eyes. She pressed her palms against the cool window and whispered, "Not again. Please, not again." Behind her, a voice said softly, "You shouldn't be alone right now." She turned to see Han standing there, his expression unreadable. "I told you I'd handle this," he said quietly. "You don't have to carry it alone." Her throat tightened. "You don't understand what this kind of scandal does. Even if it's false, people will believe it. They always do." "Then let them," he said simply. "They'll believe the truth when they see it." She laughed bitterly. "That's not how the world works." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Maybe not. But I've built my life on proving the world wrong." Their eyes met, two people forged by betrayal, standing on opposite sides of the same fire. For a heartbeat, the noise of the city fell away. There was only the hum of electricity between them. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "You could have any interpreter. Any advisor. Why risk your company for me?" Han's gaze didn't waver. "Because you remind me of someone I failed." She blinked. "Failed?" He looked past her, his expression distant. "Years ago when I was still in Seoul, a young analyst at my firm uncovered irregularities in our supply chain. She came to me with evidence, proof that one of my senior executives was laundering money. I believed her. But instead of protecting her, I hesitated. I thought I could fix it quietly. By the time I acted, she was gone. Fired. Disgraced." Lena's chest ached. "What happened to her?" "She left the country," he said quietly. "I never saw her again." He met her gaze. "You remind me of her. The same courage. The same silence after being silenced." Lena swallowed hard. "And this, helping me, is your way of making it right?" He nodded once. "Maybe it's selfish. But if I can stop men like Choi from destroying another person's life, it's worth whatever it costs." For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Lena said softly, "You can't save everyone, Mr. Han." "No," he agreed. "But I can try to save what's left of what's right." Their eyes held for another moment before he stepped back, the wall of professionalism sliding back into place. "Tomorrow morning, Kimtech's board meets at their headquarters. I've secured an invitation for us to present our findings before they finalize Choi's termination." She frowned. "Us?" "Yes," he said. "You're the one who uncovered the evidence. You'll stand beside me when we reveal it." Her pulse raced. "Me? No, I can't." "You can," he said firmly. "And you will. If you stay silent now, they win again." Her voice trembled. "What if they don't believe us?" He smiled faintly. "Then we give them proof they can't deny." That night she barely slept. The noise of rain against the window was relentless, the kind that seeps into dreams. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw headlines flashing her name, faces turning away, laughter in the hallways of Kimtech. The humiliation. The helplessness. But beneath it all she heard another voice, Han's voice, steady, certain. You won't be alone this time. When dawn came she rose, dressed, and tied her hair back with trembling hands. The suit she wore was simple, black, professional, borrowed from her roommate, but it made her feel stronger. The woman in the mirror didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like someone who had decided not to run. The car ride to Kimtech headquarters was silent. Han sat beside her, reviewing documents on his tablet, every line of his posture composed. But when the building came into view he looked up and met her eyes. No matter what happens, he said quietly, you've already won back what they took from you. She swallowed hard. And what's that? Your voice. They entered the boardroom together. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. The Kimtech directors sat in a semicircle, their expressions cold and skeptical. At the far end sat Choi, pale but defiant. He spoke first. Mr. Han, he said smoothly, I was surprised you chose to come today, given the rumors circulating about your relationship with your consultant. Han didn't flinch. I don't respond to rumors, Mr. Choi. I respond to facts. He placed a folder on the table and opened it, revealing pages of transactions, audit trails, and internal memos. These are the documents your finance department denied existed. Every one of them traces back to Hansio Analytics, and to you. The room erupted in whispers. One director leaned forward. These are serious accusations, Mr. Han. Are you prepared to defend them publicly? Han's gaze was unwavering. I don't need to defend them. The numbers speak for themselves. He nodded toward Lena. Mississippi Park, please translate. Her voice was calm, steady. She translated every word in flawless Korean, her tone sharp enough to cut through the tension. Choi glared at her, but she didn't look away. When she finished, Han turned back to the board. Gentlemen, you can investigate every file, every timestamp. You'll find that your own executive has been laundering company funds through fake consulting firms for years. And when he realized I was close to exposing him, he launched a smear campaign to protect himself. Choi's voice rose. You expect them to believe her? A disgraced employee? Lena finally turned to him. You're right, she said quietly. They shouldn't believe me. The room fell silent. They should believe the data, the same data you tried to erase. She handed the board a USB drive. Every deleted record. Every missing invoice. I saved copies before you fired me. Gasps filled the room. Choi froze. That's impossible. Han smiled faintly. You underestimate her, Mr. Choi. You always did. The board members whispered among themselves. One stood, adjusting his glasses. We'll recess to review this evidence immediately. Mr. Choi, you'll remain available for questioning. As security approached, Choi's composure cracked. His eyes blazed with fury. You think this is over? He spat. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Han's voice was cool as ice. I think we do. They turned and walked out together. The doors closed behind them with a final echoing click. Outside, the hallway was silent except for the sound of their footsteps. Lena exhaled shakily. I can't believe that just happened. Han looked at her. Believe it? You just took down the man who destroyed your life. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. I couldn't have done it without you. He shook his head. No. You did this. You found the courage to stand again. For the first time in years, Lena allowed herself to smile. Not the polite, practiced smile of survival, but something real. Something free. As they stepped into the sunlight streaming through the glass lobby, it felt like the world itself had shifted. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered, etched forever into the light. The boardroom confrontation had ended in silence, but the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the stunned, trembling quiet of a world suddenly shifting. When the doors closed behind them, Lena and Han both knew that something irreversible had just happened. Outside the Kimtech building, the air was cold and bright. Reporters swarmed near the steps, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Questions echoed in English and Korean alike. Mr. Han, is it true you accused Kimtech of fraud? Mississippi Park, were you involved in the data breach? Did you two conspire to sabotage the merger? Han raised a hand calmly. No comments until the investigation concludes, he said in a steady voice. His composure was flawless, his expression unreadable. But Lena, walking beside him, felt the tremor under his control, the ripple of adrenaline that came after a storm. Security guided them to the waiting car. As the doors shut, muffling the chaos, Lena exhaled shakily. They'll spin this, she said. No matter what the board decides, they'll twist it until it looks like we're the villains. Han looked at her, his jaw tightening. Let them. The truth doesn't need permission to exist. She shook her head. You really believe that? I have to, he said simply. Otherwise, none of this means anything. The The car pulled away. The city rolled by outside, gray towers, flashing billboards, streets pulsing with noise. But for once, Lena didn't feel invisible in it. For once, she'd stood up and been seen. 2 days passed in a blur of news reports, statements, and waiting. The investigation into Kimtech spread like wildfire. Leaked documents confirmed everything: the shell companies, the false consulting fees, the offshore accounts in Choi's name. The story exploded across business networks and news feeds worldwide. Headlines screamed, "Kimtech executive resigns amid scandal." Han Industrial Group vindicated after expose. Whistleblower's testimony clears company of wrongdoing. Lena watched the coverage from her apartment, sitting cross-legged on the couch in stunned silence. Her face appeared briefly on the screen, a blurry still from the press conference. The caption read, "Former employee turned interpreter helps uncover corporate fraud." Her phone buzzed with messages she hadn't expected. Old co-workers, friends from college, even her estranged father. Most were simple words: "Proud of you. You were right. You did it." But each one hit her harder than she wanted to admit. She turned off the TV and sat in the quiet, staring at the reflection of the city lights through the rain-streaked window. The world outside had moved on, but inside, everything still felt raw. Victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like exhaustion. Like the moment after running too far for too long. A knock at the door pulled her back to reality. When she opened it, Han stood there, still in his suit, tie loosened, rein on his shoulders. "I thought you might not be sleeping," he said. She blinked, surprised. "How did you know where I live?" He smiled faintly. "You filled out a consultancy form for payroll. I read everything." She stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was small, tidy, and quiet except for the hum of the heater. Han looked around briefly, then handed her a file. The official verdict. Kimtech's board voted to remove Choi from his position permanently. He's under investigation by sole prosecutors. Lena's breath caught. "It's really over?" Han nodded. "For him, yes. For us, maybe not." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "There's talk of merging with another company," he said. Han Industrial's reputation took a hit from the media backlash, even though we were cleared. Investors don't like uncertainty. "So you might lose your company?" He shrugged lightly. "If it happens, so be it. I've rebuilt before." She studied him. "You don't seem angry." "I am," he admitted quietly. "But not for myself. For people like you, people who tell the truth and pay the price for it." Lena looked down at the file in her hands. "You don't owe me anything, you know?" "I disagree." He stepped closer. "You reminded me that integrity isn't a strategy, it's a choice. And sometimes it costs more than anyone should have to pay." For a long moment, neither spoke. The city hummed outside, the rain tapping softly against the window. Then Lena asked, "So what now?" Han smiled faintly. "Now, we start again. But on our terms." A week later, Han Industrial called a press conference. The world's media gathered, cameras flashing, voices buzzing. Han stood behind the podium, immaculate as ever, but his tone carried a new edge, a clarity born from what they'd both survived. "Truth," he said into the microphones, "is not a corporate asset. It's not negotiable. It belongs to everyone who refuses to stay silent." Behind him, Lena stood quietly, translating his words for the Korean outlets. Each sentence echoed through the room, steady and sure. It wasn't just a statement, it was a declaration. When it was over, reporters swarmed them again, but this time the questions were different. "Mississippi Park, what's next for you? Will you continue working with Han Industrial? Do you see yourself as a whistleblower or a survivor?" Lena smiled softly. "Neither," she said. "I just see myself as someone who finally stopped whispering." The room erupted in applause. That night, they celebrated quietly in the corner of a small rooftop bar overlooking the river. It wasn't a victory party exactly, more like an exhale. The kind of night where silence meant safety. Lena leaned on the railing, watching the reflections of city lights ripple in the dark water below. Han joined her, setting 2 glasses on the ledge. "I don't think I've ever thanked you properly," she said. "You don't need to," he replied. "You earned your own redemption." She smiled faintly. "Maybe. But I wouldn't have had the chance without you." He looked out over the skyline. "When I first came here, I thought success was about control. About making people respect you through fear. But then I met you. And I realized, it's not fear that earns respect. It's courage." She turned toward him. "You talk like a man who's finally free." He chuckled softly. "Maybe I am." They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. The air was cool, scented faintly of rain and smoke. Somewhere far below, music drifted up from a street corner, soft and melancholic. Lena traced the rim of her glass absently. "You know," she said, "for years I avoided that building, Kimtech. I couldn't even walk past it. Every time I saw their logo I felt small, invisible. But when we walked in together, I didn't feel that way anymore." Han's gaze was steady. Because you weren't the same person anymore. She met his eyes. No, I wasn't. He smiled gently. Then that's your victory. Not theirs. Not mine. Yours. Her throat tightened. I don't know what I'll do next. Go back to school maybe? Or start teaching translation. You'd be good at that, he said. Helping people find their voices. She laughed softly. Maybe. And you? What's next for the great Han Jae-sung? He smirked faintly. Survive the press for another week. Then disappear for a while. You? Disappear? He raised an eyebrow. Even CEOs need quiet sometimes. She tilted her head, teasing. Where will you go? He glanced at her, a rare glint of warmth in his eyes. That depends. You free for a trip to Seoul? Lena blinked. You're joking. Not entirely. He shrugged. I have to face my board there eventually. Could use a translator who doesn't lie. She smiled, shaking her head. You're impossible. And you're fearless, he replied. Their laughter mingled with the wind. It wasn't flirtation so much as recognition, the quiet understanding between two people who'd seen the worst of power and chosen to stay kind anyway. Weeks passed. The world moved on as it always did. The story faded from headlines, replaced by new scandals, new heroes, new tragedies. But for Lena, the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was peaceful. She found a new job at a nonprofit that specialized in language access for immigrants. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt right. Every time she helped someone navigate a legal form or translate a medical report, she felt that same quiet strength she'd found standing beside Han. Sometimes she saw his name on the news, another interview, another speech, always calm and commanding. He'd restored his company's image, even gained new partners abroad. Yet every so often, a handwritten note would appear in her mailbox, unsigned, written in clean, deliberate script. Still listening to the truth? H. She'd smile every time. One evening, months later, she received a call from an unknown number. When she answered, a familiar voice greeted her. Mississippi Park. Or should I say Director Park now? She laughed. Who told you about that? I have my sources, Han replied. Congratulations. You earned it. Thank you. And you? I'm calling from Seoul. We just opened a new foundation, one that protects whistleblowers in corporate sectors. I wanted you to know you inspired it. Lena's eyes widened. You're serious? Completely. And I was wondering if you'd consider joining the advisory board. She froze. Me? I'm not. You're exactly what we need, he interrupted gently. Someone who knows what it means to lose everything for the truth and still choose to speak. For a moment she couldn't speak. The weight of it, the full circle of everything they'd endured, settled over her like sunlight. She smiled through the lump in her throat. Send me the details. I already have. They talked for a while longer, about Seoul, about the foundation, about the strange peace that comes after survival. Before hanging up, Han said softly, You once told me the world believes lies faster than truth. Maybe. But thanks to you, at least now they'll think twice. When the call ended, Lena sat by the window, the city spread out before her like a field of light. The rain had stopped. Somewhere in the distance she could see the faint glimmer of dawn. She whispered to the glass, Maybe the world does change, one voice at a time. The following month she flew to Seoul for the first time in years. The air was crisp and clear, the skyline familiar yet different. Han met her at the airport, dressed casually for once, no bodyguards, no entourage. Just him. Welcome home, he said. She smiled, her heart unexpectedly light. It doesn't feel like home yet. It will, he said. Give it time. They drove through the city in comfortable silence. Old streets flashed by, neighborhoods she remembered from childhood, bridges and markets that smelled like nostalgia. But this time she wasn't a ghost passing through. She was someone returning on her own terms. At the foundation's opening ceremony, journalists filled the hall again, but their questions were different now. Not accusatory, curious, hopeful. Han took the stage, his voice strong and steady. Justice doesn't begin with power. It begins with courage. And courage often begins with someone who has every reason to stay silent, and doesn't. Then he turned, gesturing toward her. Lena Park is one of those people. Applause filled the room. She felt her chest tighten, not with fear this time but pride. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped to the microphone, hands steady. I once thought the truth was a weapon, she began. Something you used to fight back. But it's not. It's a light. It shows who we are when the power goes out. The audience was silent, listening. She looked over at Han, who gave a small nod, and she smiled. I spent years hiding from that light. But someone reminded me that it was never gone, it was just waiting for me to open my eyes. When she finished, the applause rose again, gentle at first, then thunderous. She felt tears prick her eyes, but this time she didn't hide them. Later, after the event, she found herself standing outside on the terrace, the Seoul skyline glowing like a dream. Han joined her, 2 glasses in hand. To new beginnings, he said. She clinked her glass against his. To truth, she replied. They stood side by side, looking out over the city that had once cast them both aside. Neither spoke for a long time. There was nothing left to say. The story was over, but the echo of it would live on, carried quietly in the lives they'd touched. And for the first time in a long time, Lena didn't feel like the waitress who once hid from her past. She felt like someone who had stood in the storm, spoken the truth and walked out the other side still whole. In the quiet that followed, Han turned to her, his voice soft. Do you ever think about that night, the restaurant, the misunderstanding? She smiled. All the time. It feels like a lifetime ago. He nodded. It was the beginning. The beginning of what? He looked out over the lights. Of everything that mattered. The wind carried their laughter into the night, and the city below shimmered with the kind of beauty that only comes after surviving the storm. The following year arrived quietly without fanfare or headlines. The storm that had once surrounded Han Industrial and Kimtech had long subsided, replaced by the calm rhythm of rebuilding. The city had moved on, the world had found new scandals to chase, and Lena Park had built something no rumor could destroy, a life defined by purpose. Spring sunlight poured into her new office in Seoul, illuminating stacks of documents and handwritten notes spread across the table. The foundation for corporate transparency, the organization she and Han had built together, had grown faster than anyone expected. What began as an idea over coffee had turned into a movement spanning 2 continents. Journalists, lawyers, whistleblowers and translators alike worked side by side, fighting for the same goal, truth without fear. The air hummed with quiet determination. A young intern hurried past, carrying a folder marked confidential. Another volunteer was on a call, her voice firm as she coached a frightened employee through the process of filing a report. And at the heart of it all sat Lena, calm and composed, her presence both grounding and gentle. People looked to her not for authority but for assurance, the kind that comes from someone who's walked through fire and come out whole. Her phone buzzed. A text message flashed across the screen. Han Jae-sung, landing in 30 minutes. Don't start without me. Lena smiled. He still thinks I wait for him, she muttered under her breath, setting the phone aside. She turned back to her computer, reviewing the agenda for the upcoming summit. Representatives from several global corporations were attending, including a few that had once turned a blind eye to corruption. It was poetic, she thought, how power always came full circle, how the same boardrooms that once silenced people like her were now asking for guidance. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she said. A woman stepped in, middle-aged, wearing a conservative blazer and a look of quiet gratitude. Director Park, I wanted to thank you again. Without your foundation, my case would have been buried. My company tried to discredit me just like they did to you. Lena stood, offering a warm smile. You don't owe me thanks. You did the hardest part, you spoke up. The woman's eyes shimmered. Still, it mattered that someone believed me. Lena nodded. We believe you. Always. As the woman left, Lena stood by the window for a long moment, staring out over the skyline. She could see the river glinting beneath the sunlight, the distant hum of traffic weaving through the city's pulse. Once that view had made her feel small. Now it felt endless, a horizon she had earned. By afternoon, the building was buzzing. The Foundation's first annual Transparency Summit had drawn more attendees than expected. Reporters filled the atrium, cameras poised. Guests from across the globe mingled over coffee, exchanging stories of reform and accountability. On the far side of the room, a stage had been set up with a sleek white podium and the Foundation's logo glowing softly behind it. Lena moved through the crowd, greeting faces she recognized, lawyers who'd once doubted her, journalists who'd once dismissed her story. Each smile felt like a quiet redemption. Then she heard a familiar voice behind her. Looks like you built an empire. She turned. Han stood there, suitcase still in hand, his tie slightly loosened, a trace of exhaustion beneath his calm demeanor. But his eyes, those sharp, steady eyes, still carried the same spark that had drawn her into this fight a year ago. You're late, she teased. He smiled. You started early. Someone had to make sure you didn't steal all the credit. He laughed, and for a moment they were no longer CEO and director, just 2 people who had fought the same war and found peace on the same battlefield. You look different, he said softly. So do you, she replied. They stood side by side watching the audience settle. The lights dimmed slightly as the summit began. Lena was the first to speak. She walked to the podium, her heels clicking softly against the stage. The cameras flashed, but she didn't flinch. She'd faced worse than bright lights. Good afternoon, she began in both English and Korean. A year ago, I was sitting in a courtroom accused of crimes I didn't commit. A year ago, I thought truth was a punishment, a thing that only brought pain. But today I stand before you as proof that truth is not a weapon. It's a foundation. She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the crowd. The people in this room and countless others watching are proof that courage is contagious. Every voice that dares to speak makes it easier for the next to be heard. Applause broke out. She smiled, her voice softening. This foundation isn't about power. It's about balance. It's about reminding the world that silence is a choice, and that choice defines who we are. She ended with a simple sentence. The truth will always find its way as long as someone is willing to walk beside it. When she stepped away, Han replaced her at the podium. His words were brief but powerful, the kind of message that didn't need embellishment. Justice, he said, isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. The goal isn't to destroy the guilty but to protect the innocent. And none of that happens without people like Lena Park, people who remind us that integrity doesn't break even when everything else does. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, it was steady, reverent. The kind that carried meaning. That evening after the summit ended, the two of them stood on the rooftop terrace again, the same one where they'd celebrated months earlier, though the air was warmer now, gentler. Lanterns glowed along the railings and laughter drifted from below. Lena leaned against the railing, her hair catching the breeze. You realize you're going to be on every business magazine cover next week, she said. Han chuckled. Good. Maybe someone will finally spell my name right. She laughed softly, then turned serious. Do you ever think about how different everything could have been? If that night hadn't happened, the restaurant, the misunderstanding. He looked at her thoughtfully. I think about it all the time. But I don't see it as coincidence anymore. No. He shook his head. The right people don't come into your life by accident. They show up when you've run out of excuses to ignore who you're supposed to become. She smiled at that, eyes glinting in the city lights. You sound like one of your speeches. He grinned. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just telling the truth. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the skyline fade into night. Below them, Seoul shimmered, alive, unbroken, beautiful. The same city that had once swallowed them both now reflected their strength back like light off glass. Do you ever miss the quiet? She asked suddenly. Han tilted his head. What do you mean? The time before all of this. Before the foundation, before the headlines. When it was just survival. He thought for a moment. Sometimes. But quiet doesn't always mean peace. And chaos doesn't always mean danger. Sometimes, it just means we're living the truth out loud. Lena nodded, understanding. They lingered until the city began to fade beneath the first light of dawn. As the horizon warmed, Han turned to her. I'm leaving for Busan tomorrow, he said. There's a conference on financial ethics. You should come. She smiled faintly. Trying to recruit me again? Always. She laughed, shaking her head. We'll see. He looked at her one last time, a rare softness in his expression. No matter where this goes, Lena, you did something most people spend their whole lives avoiding. You faced the truth and didn't look away. Her voice was quiet but steady. I had help. He smiled. Maybe. But courage isn't contagious unless someone starts it. As he walked away, the morning sun caught on the glass buildings around them, scattering light across the city like broken mirrors reassembled. She watched him go, her heart full, not with longing but with peace. Months later, a letter arrived at the foundation. The envelope was simple, postmarked from Busan. Inside, on thick paper, were just 3 handwritten lines. The world listens differently now. You did that. H. She tucked the letter into her journal, beside a pressed flower she'd kept from the restaurant centerpiece on the night they met. A reminder that even the smallest moments could bloom into something vast. Every morning after that, when she walked into her office and saw the foundation's motto engraved on the wall, "Truth is light," she smiled. Because she knew it wasn't just a slogan. It was a promise. And for the first time in her life, she no longer feared the sound of her own voice. A year later, a short documentary titled, The Translator Who Changed the Game, aired across international platforms. It told the story of Lena Park, the shy waitress who once corrected a CEO and uncovered a web of corruption that spanned continents. But what made it resonate wasn't the scandal, it was the quiet power of her transformation. The final scene showed her standing before a classroom full of young translators, saying simply, "Your words matter. Even when the world tells you they don't. Especially then." The camera pulled back as applause filled the room. The screen faded to black with one final line. The truth will always find a voice as long as someone believes it deserves one.